Why are wins so important to be talking about?
It's amazing, when you're in there working one-on-one with the leader or with the leadership teams, so often the gravity, the pull is to the negative. It's to today's fires, this kind of thing. And in fact, based on the book that I wrote about effective meetings, there was one time when I was teaching that workshop, and when you're talking, teaching teams about effective meetings, a lot of stuff comes up. They grumble for about the first hour for the work, and somewhere in there, I'm like, okay, great, you've been grumbling for a bit, but how do you celebrate? And that's the first time they shut up. It's really interesting because they've been ready to talk about what's wrong, but then they didn't know to talk about how to celebrate. And then I led to another question instinctively. I remember early on where I said, great, do you have, in terms of related to celebration, do you have a wins list? This was the base question that switched all of my work to this winning sort of support-based approach because no one had a wins list. And so you could see very quickly that was not where they were putting their energy in the work that they were doing. So to go to strengths-based and start with, instead of starting with what keeps you awake at night, typical consultant question, that kind of thing, it's tell me about your biggest win and how'd you get it? And then I help them to articulate how they do that. It's super exciting for me because networking is fun now. Like I get to go to a networking event and that's my first question. Like even before I'm like, who are you and what do you do? I'm like, tell me about your biggest win. And I get these wonderful stories from people over and over again. I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens of times. And now with the podcast, 45, 46 episodes in now, that's where this whole thing starts. We have these rich, rich conversations. And what I'm finding, especially in Canada these days, in an elbows up moment, there's never been a more important time to get our wins out first because we need these leaders to let people know what they're good at, what their strengths are, so that other people can hear them, interact with them, and we can, again, build capacity, raise all those boats together.
So one of the things that I hear is that we are have this human nature that tends to go to the negative. That's what we see. And I think maybe there's some conditioning with media approach too, that they think that's what we want. When truly, if we put ourselves in a room where people are actually in celebration, it's not what we want. We don't want to be drawn to the negativity, but where we put our focus, of course, that's where we put our attention. So, what is one thing that you would tell people if they wanted to start making the shift? Because this is a habit, right? This is something that's developed over time. What do you recommend that people do?
It's that simple question of, do you have a wins list? And so when I'm in a crowd of 90 people, 160 people, one person, and I ask that question, often when they say they don't have one, they'll say it in a way that gets into that psychology that you were just sort of alluding to. It'll be that moment where they think they should have one. They're not sure whether they should say they should have or shouldn't. What I'm able to do then just is simply give them that permission in a sense. And it's not me giving them the permission. It's just a prompt to say, well, just start. And what's fun when you're, speaking at a conference or whatever, you see all those heads go down. And for the first time, they're just sort of running free and they're writing down sort of, without judgment, all the good stuff that's been happening in their lives. And then for me, I'm hoping it's a gift for them to revisit on a regular basis where they can then reinforce the positive. And ideally, in that plus minus column, we're trying to get more of those pluses than minuses. And then what fascinates me is as we dig into, once we've got that wins list, we can start to compartmentalize it if we go a little bit deeper and say, wait a second, what was it that contributed to that win? What was my attitude at that time? Who was around me at that time? What was the structure? What were the operational components? What was happening for that win that made it occur? Could I learn a structured way to go back in, dig it out, and then do it again is my hope. But start with the wins list. That's the most basic thing. 5 minutes, 5 hours if you really want to get into it. But just start with that one thing of get it down, start to see yourself in that way. And that starts to the rewiring that we need going forward.
What I find really interesting is you said give them permission, and not necessarily giving them permission, but a prompt. And when we have a prompt, it helps us move forward. But why is it, do you think people have such a hard time celebrating or sharing a win? I know we talk about bragging, shameless self-promotion, but how do you help people overcome that? They're going to think I'm bragging or boastful.
One of the things that I hope certainly the leaders that I'm trying to reach are motivated by is what happens if they don't?
Mm,
What happens if you are, I'll pick out categories for a second, and I'm not going to say I'm an expert in these categories. As a woman, if you go, and this is just sort of in the ether and people I've talked to, if you don't brag and talk about your wins at those right moments throughout your career, you could be out $1 million by the time you retire. If you don't, as a leader, when you're trying to capacity build in industries that are being upset by tariffs, talk about what you're ready to do and what skills you're good at a time when we need to shift and adapt and innovate, then you're missing out on an opportunity. I think it's quite profound. It's beyond just sort of, oh, shucks, I'm Canadian, I'm going to hold back. It's way beyond that. It's bigger. And so it's a mission driven thing where, in the most uncomfortable way, because it is the discomfort that's holding it back. But if we stay in, aw shucks, like I interviewed a fella who is, sorry, just very quickly, you say his name is Jerry Hanna, wonderful guy. Clearflow is his company. His episode's going to be coming out soon. But he sells his first company in his 40s, gets bored, starts another company, sells the company because he doesn't like the company. Then someone comes to him and says, we have a water problem off a highway. He gets a fish tank in his basement. 19 years later, he's got 10 patents. The regulators come to him for advice about how to treat water. When I'm getting that story out of him and he's articulating it in a way that we're hearing that, and then I'm telling other people about his story, I'm now connecting him. I'm not even in his space. I'm connecting him to other water specialists, other people that can build capacity in that area, especially when they're trying to do the work they're trying to do in those major areas. So to me, this is very mission driven. It's actually not stopping at that moment of I'm uncomfortable. I'm like, we've got to break through that discomfort pretty quickly, because the motivation to do that is either going to help you individually, it's going to help you support your kids, your workers, whatever that is, but we have to start practicing how to get it out there. And that's why I built the Anatomy of Win structure, to actually give people a 5-part approach to doing that.
Yeah. Before we talk about the structure, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about what you've just said. What I find fascinating is people don't understand about the win, from what I'm hearing, is not only is it building credibility and trust that you have the knowledge base, but often, people's supervisors or other leaders do not see that person in action all the time. So it's not until they hear the celebration of that success that they'll be like, oh, when an opportunity comes up, who do you want to be top of mind with? Right? So I hear credibility, I hear trust, I hear skill set, I hear so many other things that people don't think of when they're sharing the win.
And that's absolutely right. And so you can imagine that moment when you are in your year-end review. Let's say it doesn't matter who you are, where you are in the company.
Yeah.
If you're not coming forward and saying, I did this, this, and this, then no one else is going to stand up for you. So marketing you Inc., in a sense, is the critical part here to allow yourself to build that capacity. And that's absolutely there. And what's shocking to me, honestly, is I can get someone say that's at an entry level of their career, trying to learn these skills and whatever. I'm talking about serious leaders that are leading large organizations that just don't have it rolling off their tongue in the way that they need to be able to do these things and move the mountains that we need to move. So I find myself, again, certainly mission driven from my point of view of moving that forward more quickly. And I don't think we have time for oh, I'm shy, I can't. It's how I was brought up. I can tell you from spending time in groups, and I'll say this again, if I have to separate the guys and men and women in a sense, one of the things, I actually spent a lunch with some serious women leaders. And what was stunning to me is they're still carrying forward voice from, I think, if we all have our 12-year-old selves. But I mean, very typical gender-drawn lines that don't allow those wins to be expressed. And I don't mean to get into it, and I don't mean to sound like an expert in that area. I think women leaders that hear what I just said get it, but they're not rising. They're limited in how far they can get to. And so I think this getting at whoever it's with, for yourself, get coaching, whoever can help you to express yourself, not in a bragging way. It's not bragging. It's saying, no, I did these things. These are the results. These are the capabilities that I have. And hopefully getting into that tone zone is the idea.
Yeah. And I think as you grow in leadership, you learn to develop that a lot more. And the other thing that I also think about is, if I'm the decision maker, I don't always have a luxury of time to make the decisions. And when people have shared with me the successes, or people who are top of mind, those are the people I'm going to go to first to do the work that needs to be done, versus someone saying, oh, I didn't tell you about this. and they miss an opportunity. And this is one of the things I guess I want to stress from what you're sharing is we don't want to be missing opportunities when you're put in front of decision makers every single day of what you're capable of.
I think we want to really make sure that your capabilities get put forward. And then we don't want to have that nighttime conversation when you go home and you talk to your spouse or your dog or whoever you talk to and say, oh, they should have known. I did those things. I should have been recognized. We hear that typical one with the year-end reviews for the managers or whatever, and they can't remember the 12 months. They might remember what's happened in the last 60 days, but people arrive in those moments when they're supposed to get a raise, but somebody can't remember what happened because that person didn't take responsibility for themselves to walk into that situation. The manager might have been too busy. It may not have been even intentional, but if they didn't remember all the good stuff that happened along the way. So you can imagine another sort of typical practical tool is the timeline, right? Like what were those moments that happened in the last year where it was you that did that, you that sort of made those things occur. You can talk also this way about your team and those things as well. But I think it's really important, and I'm glad to hear that you're pulling out the parts of it that stress the need for getting yourself represented in a winning way.
Well, one of the other things that comes to me is why are we waiting until the annual review, right? When you said like every 3 months, well, why not every month or every week, like every day? Like you said, what's the win of the day? So that people have it top of mind for themselves. But not only that, does it create a momentum?
And we need that momentum. People need it individually. And again, we're building resilience up against everything we're up against, right? So if we know that we're spending all this time in the doghouse every day for all the different reasons that sort of drag us down, I just was dealing with some folks in a company culture where, you've got that middle layer that's just getting crushed by the upper layer and they can't do anything about it. So they're feeling that helplessness and they just can't even imagine talking about a win. Well, I walk in, I'm like, well, let's get a little toehold in there. There's got to be something. How do we incrementally, again, build resilience if that's what you're needing to do? But when we talk about innovation, and I can tell you, I've spent a lot of time in the innovation ecosystem, certainly in Alberta, and we see genius inventors who are being asked as entrepreneurs to do all things, but if they're not good communicators, then they shouldn't be doing that. They're not the ones that can be promoting themselves to do that win aspect. So again, knowing your strengths and how to express the wins comes into the play here too. Should it be you that does it? Should you get someone else to do it for you? But we need to surface the wins no matter how they happen.
Yeah. The other thing that I think of is some people might not really comprehend. And I know it seems like it should be so simple. It should be just common sense, but what would be an example of some wins that people would share? Because some people might win. I've never thought about it before. So what is a win?
Yeah, and I love that you bring that up. And certainly when I do the teaching, I originally, some of the earlier workshops for teaching the wins workshop ideas is, bring the dictionary definition, and it doesn't work. I actually ask that question. I say, well, maybe I should know, but guess what? What do you think a win is? And we start to hear a wide variety. And it really is, again, it's another prompt. What is a win? You know what's funny? I'll just ask you. What's a win for you? And we'll maybe use that as part of the basis of this section of the conversation.